Hello everybody, welcome to another installation of the ULF. Well, today we're doing a video on socialism and Soviet democracy as a whole. We're just going to have an open flow podcast and discussion. And today we got a pretty large grouping, so I'm going to go basically from left to right. So,
Hey, this is Jacko.
This is Volgin.
Hey gang, this is Comrade Taras.
Comrade Little Lamb.
This is Comrade Maine.
And so to start, we already have the what is Soviet democracy and the what is socialism videos. And this is basically it's going to be a full conversation about what really all of that means and what all of that really comes down to and boils down to at the end of the day. Our own personal experiences with, how capitalism is and what it does and how things would be so fundamentally different if socialism existed basically in America, and how fundamentally different in any capitalist country, how drastically things would be altered if we were living under a system that was actually designed for the people. So if anyone has anything they want to say off the bat relating to that, or we can just, dive in and say whatever. I would just say a personal experience with myself would be seeing my dad get laid off back during the recession, and how no one in GM and any of the automotive companies had like a right to a job. They just could be tossed out like dirt, like many of them are, and there's no real right to be employed, and people can be fired for whatever at any time. Mass layoffs happen all the time. Company stops making a profit, they fire all their workers and just call it a setback or something like that. It's just grotesque and disgusting, and it's just another way to keep people down. And I think about how drastically things would be different if there wasn't boom and bust cycles in the economy, if people always had a right to a house, if people always had a right to a job, how drastically different things would be at a personal level. And I think that's the biggest draw, at least I have, to socialism, is just this personal view, this humanist view. I don't know.
What I think would be different is like Chairman Jack, based off personal experience, is that I grew up in a small town and it's very impoverished. I haven't experienced it firsthand, but I have seen poverty. I've seen like the worst of capitalism, and not just from the economic side of it, but like the social side, these social relations. And you have a culture of these people who are very individual, who only like see themselves. They don't see the collective. They're selfish. They're mean to each other, and it's just not the way to live. Like, you have all these people that are in poverty, that struggle to pay the bills, to put food on the table and have a roof over their heads. And then you just have these people, these higher ups, that are just so selfish that they don't want to help them out, because they've been brainwashed into thinking that this is how it is, this is how the world works, this is how things need to be. All these poor people, they're just freeloaders. They don't deserve our money, they don't deserve our help, they don't deserve any of it. And it's just fundamentally not true. When did we sacrifice being human, having, loving one another, caring for each other, caring for the collective, for this consumer greedy culture that has just alienated everyone? People have a hard time talking to other people. We're so alienated by our current system that we can't even talk to each other. There's a culture of anxiety that lays in this world, in this country, in this culture, that people are just so individualized,
Self-absorbed.
Exactly. This culture of individualized of individualism has created this generation of anxiety, of depression, of stress. People don't know whether or not they're going to get a job now, or go to college, or have basic health care because it's too expensive, or anything like that. I'm allergic to bees. If I get stung by a bee, I could possibly die if I didn't have an EpiPen or get sent to the hospital. If you're poor, if you're a working class person who doesn't have health insurance, and you can't get things like an EpiPen because they're super expensive. You could literally die. The same thing goes for an education. If you can't afford it, which you most likely can't because of the interest rates, you're going to be drowning in debt, and that just ruins everything. Same thing with healthcare too, like I said
You can't
before.
even afford to go and get educated.
Yeah.
You're stuck in menial labor jobs that are dead end and are slowly being automated, that people in 10, 20 years, even if capitalism doesn't fall into some ultimate crisis and just keeps in this constant boom like they fetishize and think things are going to be, their jobs would still be gone eventually.
Exactly.
And coming from what Volgin was talking about, how people are just brainwashed in this way and now they are only thinking about themselves. You don't just see this with the rich, you see this also with people who are struggling through poverty. They also believe that this is just the way it is, and this makes it hard for them to get through it. It doesn't provide a safe space between people who are struggling with poverty, because it's almost like they feel like everybody's out to get them. Even other people who are going through poverty, there's no
Alternative?
Yeah, they feel like there's no alternative. There's no uplifting of other people who are, like, working class should support and try to lift up other working class. You shouldn't feel alienated. That shouldn't be something that you should have to struggle with.
Yeah, I think there's a great quote that gets thrown around from time to time on that, and kind of the cultural mindset of those that are impoverished in the working class here in America. And it's a quote it's commonly misattributed to John Steinbeck, but it actually came from Ronald Wright. And it's critiquing that kind of idea, and he essentially says that socialism never took root in America, because he describes it as the poor see themselves not as an exploited proletariat, but as temporarily embarrassed millionaires.
Yeah.
There's this kind of innate, deeply ingrained through propaganda and through just cultural manipulation and cultural, to use a term from Gramsci, cultural hegemony that has been built up by the ruling class to conquer and divide and make sure capitalism is the dominant ideology. There's this built-in idea in the American psyche that they are nothing more than a temporarily embarrassed millionaire. It's this whole concept of the American dream. If you work hard enough, if you put in enough time, if you do the right, if you do make the right moves, you do the right thing, any person can be a millionaire, and you will be a millionaire one day. It's one day. And essentially the problem with that is, as so many people across, all the political spectrum and ideology will recognize, is that, that's just bullshit. And it's something that's just so deeply ingrained in the American psyche. It's why it's very hard to talk about many Americans about socialism, because there's this innate idea that, well, no, I can make it through the system. I have to work hard. I have to wait for my time to come, because I'm nothing more than a temporarily embarrassed millionaire.
I think that and what Jacko and Volgin said about this constant competitiveness, workers constantly going at each other and always, poor people shitting on other poor people all the time, is due to saying, oh, well, you're lesser than me because you're this classist slur or something else, calling people white trash or something like that, saying, oh, you're white trash, I'm going to be something. Or this fantasization of just, oh, I'm going to be this and that, so you're beneath me. You don't have ambition. You don't have aims. And it leads to these people just being cutthroats when at work and things like that, when in actuality we should be helping each other. We should be working together rather than just being like, oh, I'm going to be something someday, so I don't care about my other employees, and I'm going to constantly try to push them down and kiss boots so I look the best.
I'd like to add that, now, in our current stage of capitalism, and with the progression of technology and how fast it's progressing and how fast it has compared to any other time, really. We're not only competing with other working class people or the bourgeoisie, we're competing with artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence is continuing and getting more advanced to the point where like it's taking away the working class jobs, and we need to find a system where like capitalism simply is not going to work if artificial intelligence keeps advancing, and we're not going to have the job security like we have in the past, and we're not really like our government is not making the moves to make sure that all of our people are in good health, in financial security, and like that's terrifying.
Yeah, our system's not prepared to deal with such an advancement in technology, and as a result it's going to leave all poor and working class essentially at the barest bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, I would agree with that. A lot of what I've been seeing recently, back when I was more liberal, I guess you could say, was basically this argument that, hey, artificial intelligence is becoming a thing, automation is becoming a thing, so rather than move forward, to socialism, basically, let's make more concessions with the bourgeoisie. Let's cut their taxes. Let's freeze wages, because otherwise they're just going to automate, and then they're going to take away your jobs, or they're going to send them to Mexico or something like that. So let's just keep doing more concessions, freeze wages, cut taxes on the rich. Just keep the poor down.
Keep the poor poor.
Keep them poor, so we don't have to go to this, so we don't go to automation, which they're threatening, which we're gonna get to anyways, so it's pointless.
I think another thing that pairs with that is this is now reaching more and more of the grand crisis of capitalism. Is capitalism at its very base is somebody makes a product and they pay wage laborers to make said product and pay them a wage so that they can buy the product that they are making. It's like, let's say you work at Meijer, right? You are paid a wage, so then they offer you like in-store discounts if you're an employee, or like what they do with a lot of stores. So then you come back to buy the product. Well, guess what? They automate everything. That leads to mass unemployment, so then people can't buy anything anymore. And this is the grand crisis that we're starting to see is, if there is full automation under capitalism and there is no central planning, then people don't have homes anymore. And what do people have to lose when they don't have any basic necessities anymore? When people don't have jobs anymore because those jobs don't exist? Like, what is going to happen versus what automation would mean under socialism if everyone's guaranteed these basic rights and is guaranteed a share of the collective is, we can benefit off of collectivization or automation together. But under capitalism, all it's going to lead to is people like Jeff Bezos getting richer and richer as half the population doesn't have a place to work anymore. And I'd entirely agree with what Comrade Little Lamb said in regards to that.
And I feel like perhaps our generation, meaning like young adults at this point, may not reap the benefits of socialism or any sort of grand like change at this point, but we need to look forward to future generations and ensure and teach them that this is something that is possible, and teach them so that they have the tools to make this happen. Like,
yeah, I'd entirely agree with that. Even if we pass capitalism within our lifetimes, which is possible, I still don't think, it'll be our kids that will have to carry on socialism. Like, I think, honestly, Khrushchev, out of all people, kind of said it best when he made the speech about your children will be communists and we will bury you. That speech, because it just basically is like, goes to show like what he was meaning. Like, it won't be the current generation that is going to defeat the system. It's going to the people that, yeah, we defeat the system, but the system, capitalism, can come back if there isn't people to continue in the struggle and defeat it. Like, Gorbachev was a child of the revolution, but what did he do? He proceeded to blow up the system on its face in the hopes of just vague appeasement of the West. Yeah, I entirely agree with that. We need to have this constant education going on, or else, and this constant entouchment with the masses, or else it'll simply lead to this grand struggle that we're all trying to fight for just collapsing in on its face.
So we really just need to plant the seed and see what happens.
Yeah, I think, like, people think that the transition to socialism is just socialism.
Yeah.
It's not. The transition to socialism is a long process, because not only are you dealing with the economic mode of production, like the economic side of it, you're dealing with the societal aspect, and there are so many contradictions within capitalism that exist. There's not only like the economic one between classes, there's also racism, misogyny, homophobia, all those stuff, all these like superstructural issues that are in place now, and simply transitioning isn't going to solve it. There's also going to be potential overthrow of socialism that exists. There's going to be that probability. So it's going to take a long time. It's going to be a long, hard fight to transition to socialism, to full socialism, then from there full on communism. But frankly, it is a fight it is worth fighting for, and I do agree that there should be much education to continue that fight and make sure that fight isn't lost.
And I think, like, as we're seeing with, like, this election, though Bernie isn't a comrade, as you would say, I would say that a lot of young people are supporting him, but there is still the older generations who are making it so he cannot win, and older generations are just not willing to see the change that has happened and the opportunities that were there for them but aren't here for us. And, like, they're not willing to take that perspective, and they just can't be empathetic in that way.
And that's our job.
Yeah.
That's going to have to be our job, because Bernie Sanders is, even for us, just a stepping stone on what we want to forwardly progress to. And right now, so many of us are brainwashed to think in this capitalistic way, and
That this is it.
Yeah, that's gonna take the longest time, is breaking that brainwashing of breaking how we've thought here for so many years.
This is not it. There is another alternative. We just have to make it, like, visible, viable to other people.
And I think that Bernie Sanders is making it a little bit visible. He at least is showing that the younger generations are willing to fight this and are feeling different than the older generations here.
Mm-hmm.
So to kind of like continue off what they were saying, there's this idea that's been circulating since the fall of the Soviet Union. It's called the end of history, and it's basically like, okay, we defeated the Reds, it's over, capitalism won, this is how things are, what yada yada. That's bullshit. Like, that's so antithetical to Marxism. This is not the end of history. The fall of the Soviet Union wasn't the failure of socialism. It was a teaching moment for everyone else, but it wasn't the fall. The fall of the Soviet Union, I view it as something that shows us and the future generations, okay, this is what they did right, and this is definitely what they did wrong. So how do we improve off that? Because there's definitely successes. There's definitely still actually existing socialist states. That is true. But there is a fundamental failure that happened in the Soviet Union that we should take out of it. Not make blind praise. I mean, praise them where it needs to be, but is okay. They failed here. Now where do we go so we can actually, get somewhere and get farther than they did?
Yeah, I would take what you said and what Jacko and Comrade Little Lamb were saying earlier with Bernie. I think is kind of representative of what we're kind of going to get into with socialist democracy. Is Bernie Sanders, whatever what you want to call him, whether he be a social democrat, democratic socialist, or Rhine capitalist, whatever you want to call him, he's just asking for minute reforms to capitalism, and that's his whole shtick. And the system, i.e. the capitalist class, is trying so hard to even suppress that. They cannot even accept the most minute reforms, and that's why they're trying so hard to crush him. And why I'm not even saying, come out and die on a cross for Sanders. I think his movement is something kind of special, is putting a lot of energy out there and helping to radicalize a lot of people. But I think what really needs to be said is just the simple fact of the system at this current point is in such a rabid mode where it's nothing more than a rabid dog willing to bite at whatever hand it can get and bite at whatever it can get. And so it's willing to attack Sanders, even though Sanders is honestly the compromise candidate to keep the system afloat due to these reforms being the only thing that will allow legitimate economic growth. So I think there's that, and I think this is the perfect segue to get to the latter half of this video, which will be on how different the political system works under socialism versus capitalism. And this is what we were talking about with Sanders, is kind of real systematic of how capitalism works. Anytime the capitalists do not want minute reforms, it gets crushed. Anytime there's a certain candidate they don't like, he gets crushed. They always want to secure on what makes them the most powerful. And I think that's the big split here, is the difference under socialism is, economics or money does not have any influence on their politics. It is purely willed by the people, not by the bourgeoisie.
But the capitalist class isn't willing to give up their greed.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I think that's the difference, is in socialism after these revolutions, there is no grand capitalist to sway people with bribes and sway people with influence. It is the people, and just the people, not the pigs, that hold influence in the world.
And it's a complete system reform. You're never going to find one candidate that's going to change the entire system.
And not even just a system reform, it's a complete societal, ideological reform. And to get a lot of people who have been otherwise taught, on board, is incredibly difficult.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest part about being, at least viewing yourself as a revolutionary or as a socialist, is to constantly be educating people. But I think what really makes me think about how different, even the rights are, as I kind of said in the beginning of the video, and Volgin said about, what rights mean in these countries. A quote I wanted to say from Stalin was, "It is difficult for me to imagine what personal liberty is enjoyed by an unemployed, hungry person. True freedom can only exist where there is no exploitation and oppression by one person by another, where there is not unemployment, where a person is not in fear of losing his job, his home, and his bread. Only in such a society can personal and any other freedom exist for real and not on paper." Again, in capitalism, you're offered this freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly or press or whatever. But what does that mean if someone is starving under a bridge and can't have doesn't have food, doesn't have a house, doesn't have water, doesn't have anything, doesn't have a job? What do these rights mean? It doesn't mean anything.
I would just like to add that, a lot of people who are against communism because it's a scary word, would probably approach it otherwise if they weren't
propagandized nonstop.
I would say more approached with the idea in a more personal way. If we applied this to each and every person, like how they like fundamentally would be affected by this and how much it could change their lives for the better, they would probably be more willing to accept what communism actually is. Like, they're just afraid of the word.
I would entirely agree with that. I would think so many people have just been constantly nearly brainwashed into thinking, oh, communism, socialism, that's evil, that's so bad. But then you actually get into like what rights people have and how different their political systems are, and it's everything people ask for and everything they want, the U.S. political system and all these rights they wish they had otherwise.
And I'd say from personal experience from talking to people about socialism and communism, I tend from time to time to try to approach it in different ways to see what people most kind of react best to when talking about socialism and communism. And a lot of times when I've solely approached it from not even using the word, but from approaching it from the perspective of being like, describing the concepts of like workers control the means of production, talking about like workers having a democratic say in their workplace, and throwing examples of under a system like that where workers would decide if a factory gets shipped overseas, or the workers would decide what through democratic vote what the wage would be, that kind of thing. Most people tend to be very receptive and agree with it, but then it's as soon as you bring in the word socialism or communism, it's like not too sure about that. So when I just from my personal experience, when you approach it from what it would look like, what the exact, kind of things done under socialism, communism would be, most people tend to have a favorable opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I just think like so many people ask for politics without money. So many people ask like for a right to their house, a right to water. So many people ask for these things. So many like a right to healthcare, a right to education,
Right
not
to a
having
job.
not having to go in massive amounts of debt, just being able to be a human. And all of these things are only possible.
A human worry-free, pretty much.
Yeah, just the ability to be free. The ability to be a free person. And that can only exist in a system that is built by the masses for the masses. We are not living in such a system right now, and I think that's what's so critically different. And why I view socialism as something that has to be constantly fought for at a personal level, as every person who is a worker, at the end of the day, at least in their heart of hearts, is a socialist that doesn't know it yet, because they want all these basic rights, because it would help them so drastically much. Like every homeless person, if they knew and had the ability to know theory, or every poor person that had the ability to know theory and had the time to, without having to focus on 3 jobs or things like that.
If it was explained how they understood it.
Yeah, exactly. How these people would know it in their own words, and would not people coming at them in these hyper theorized ways, and just would speak to them. And that's the number one part of being a socialist, is going to the people, or being of the people, and being of all these things.
Speaking the people's language.
Yeah, exactly. That's so incredibly important, because that's how socialism gets built. Socialism will not be built by 5 people sitting in a room reading Marx, thinking that they're the second coming of Engels and Marx and Stalin and Lenin and Mao. How socialism will be built is boots on the ground, people in the streets being mad about the system that they are in, knowing that there is a better future. They just simply have to fight for it. That is how socialism is built. Not asking for some kumbaya on the street, not asking, but demanding and saying, this is how things need to be better, and we know this is real. We have history on our side. We have countries on our side. We know how things can be different, and that is what we must fight for, because history is not defeated. History is not dead. History is constantly flowing, and that's what we must all learn as communists, is what capitalism is a constant state of crisis. And so the only way that can be defeated is by putting a knife in that crisis and ending it. And I think that's really all I just want to get across, is simply, capitalism is a beast that must be constantly fought against, and acting as if we can all just sit in a room and read theory without going anywhere out in the streets is just, it's dead ideology. It's dead. It doesn't mean anything. You can read whatever you want, but if you're not willing to go out in the streets, you're dead already.
And the people must take what belongs to them by any means necessary.
Yeah, to quote Malcolm X, by any means necessary. That's the only way we're going to be liberated, is by any means necessary. We can't have anything off the table, or that's just another concession to the capitalist class. No one, I think, is saying that the revolution will be pretty, and that's the only way socialism can be
No
built.
revolution has ever been pretty.
Yeah, to quote Mao, the revolution is not a dinner party. Like, to also quote Mao, political power grows out of a barrel of a gun. We cannot ask for these things. We must demand these things.
And because of capitalism and how, especially in America, and how, I would say, convinced or disaffected how we have been disaffected by war, and we're not touched by these, like, we're not touched by war. We're not touched by things that make us necessarily, like, militarize. Like, we don't have what seems to be a reason to fight, and we just, like,
Because
a lot of
all
us
our
don't know
battles
how. Yeah, we don't know how to fight because we've been conditioned not to. And we've just been conditioned to be docile and obey whatever.
And if it's not at your doorstep, it's harder to look out and see that these things are still happening and your country is still doing these things. It might not be here, but
It's
it's
close
ruining
enough.
somebody else's life.
Yep.
Yeah, just to basically, I think, sum everything up, if anyone else wants any closing statements, is basically, as I kind of said, socialism is really the only way forward. It's like, in Rosa Luxemburg's words, socialism or barbarism. Like, we are left to be nothing more than a system that will kick us down like rabid dogs, in a system that acts like a rabid dog. And it's nothing more than that. It's nothing more than this barbaric system that will invade countries, overthrow them, and mass murder people if we don't fight that. If we don't ask for the liberation of all people, then we will be nothing more than slaves.
And I would say that socialism is much less scary than being in poverty, being scared for your life, that you won't have all of the things that you need. And I think that we just need to make that clear and simple to the people who would like to understand.
I'd entirely agree with that. No one else has any closing statements? I've been Chairman Jack.
I'm Jacko.
Volgin.
Comrade Little Lamb.
Comrade Maine.